No one showed up to my engagement. Then a convoy of black cars pulled up outside. Stick with me while I share my story. And if it touches you, don't forget to support our channel by hitting that subscribe button, dropping a like, and sharing it with the people you care about. I had dreamed about that night for months. My name is Tess Alden. I'm 29 and work as an interior designer in Oregon. My fiancé, Grant, was everything I thought I wanted. Handsome, charming, always saying the right thing. We'd been together for 3 years, and when he proposed, I felt like my life was finally falling into place. I booked a cozy venue by the river, filled it with white roses and gold candles. My friends promised they'd come. My family said they were proud of me. I believed them. The party was supposed to start at 7. I arrived early in a silver dress Grant said he loved. The caterers finished setting up. I stood by the entrance, checking my phone every few minutes, expecting to hear footsteps, laughter, maybe music from the parking lot. But 7 passed. Then 7:30. Then 8. The hall stayed quiet except for the sound of the river outside and the soft crackle of candles burning low. I tried calling Grant. No answer. I called my best friend, my cousin, even my mom. Straight to voicemail. I stared at the tables. Perfectly set, untouched plates of food, glasses catching the candlelight. It looked beautiful, but empty. Completely empty. A waiter came up to me, awkwardly asking if I wanted to start dinner alone. My throat tightened. I smiled weakly and said I'd wait a little longer. I told myself maybe there was traffic, or a surprise, or some kind of mix-up. Anything but the truth forming in my chest, that nobody was coming. By 9, I couldn't hold it in anymore. I walked outside, heels clicking on the pavement, cold air hitting my face. I felt stupid. Humiliated. How could everyone I loved just disappear like that? I was about to get into my car and drive home when I heard engines in the distance. Headlights appeared, first one pair, then another, then several. A line of black cars rolled slowly into the parking lot, their windows tinted, engines low and steady. They stopped right in front of me. My heart raced. I didn't recognize a single vehicle. The first door opened, and a tall man in a dark suit stepped out. He didn't smile. Behind him, more men followed, dressed the same way. They looked serious, like they were there for business, not a party. One of them held an envelope. He walked toward me and said quietly, "Ms. Alden?" I nodded, too stunned to speak. He handed me the envelope. "You should read this," he said. I opened it, hands shaking, and saw photos inside, Grant with another woman. My vision blurred. The man looked at me with pity and added, "You deserve to know the truth." That was the moment everything changed. The men from the black cars stepped out in silence, their movements slow and deliberate. The air felt heavier with each door that opened. Tess stood frozen near the curb, clutching her purse like a shield. The faint hum of the idling engines filled the empty night, and the glow from the streetlights flickered across the polished cars. None of the faces were familiar. Sharp eyes, calm expressions, no trace of warmth. One of them, taller than the rest, approached her. His shoes made a soft, steady sound against the pavement. He didn't introduce himself, didn't ask questions. He simply held out a sealed envelope. Tess hesitated, then reached for it, her fingers brushing the cold paper. The man gave a small nod, stepped back, and the others formed a quiet circle behind him, watching. She tore it open under the yellow light. A stack of glossy photos slipped into her hand. The first one made her knees weaken. Grant's face stared back at her, smiling, his arm wrapped tightly around another woman. The next photo showed them kissing, another laughing together in a restaurant Tess didn't recognize. The last one had a red stamp across the corner that read property of Alden Construction. The world tilted. For a moment, Tess couldn't breathe. The edges of the photos cut into her palm as she gripped them too tightly. Her mind spun through questions she couldn't form. The tall man finally spoke, his voice deep and even. "Miss Alden, my employer sent us. He said you'd need proof before you'd believe it." She stared at him, trying to process his words. "Who's your employer?" she managed to ask, her voice barely above a whisper. He exchanged a brief look with one of the others before answering. "Mr. Dalton. He worked with your father a long time ago." The name hit her like a memory she didn't expect. Her father had mentioned a man named Dalton years ago, a business partner from his construction company, but he had died before Tess ever met him. She took a small step closer. "Why would he send these to me?" The man's gaze softened, almost pitying. "Because this isn't just about him," he said, nodding toward the photos. "You've been betrayed by more than you think." Tess felt the night grow colder. Her thoughts tangled. Her father, the company, the strange label on the photos. None of it made sense. She wanted to ask more, but the men had already started to return to their cars. Doors shut one after another, their movements precise, rehearsed. The tall man paused at the driver's side, looking back at her one last time. "Mr. Dalton will contact you soon," he said. "Be ready." Then the engines roared to life, and the convoy pulled away, leaving Tess alone in the quiet parking lot. The photos fluttered in her trembling hands, the words Alden Construction catching the light before the darkness swallowed them again. The morning after the men left, Tess drove across town to the industrial side of the city. The sky hung low with gray clouds, and the building she stopped in front of looked abandoned. Peeling paint, cracked windows, the old sign still faintly reading Alden Construction. Her father's company. Her childhood memories came flooding back. Walking through those doors holding his hand, the smell of fresh lumber, his laughter echoing across the lot. Now silence. She pushed the door open and stepped inside. Dust coated the desks, papers scattered across the floor like no one had cared to clean up after walking away. A single computer still blinked in the corner. Tess brushed off the chair and sat, her pulse quick as she typed in the old password she remembered from years ago. To her surprise, it worked. The screen filled with files and financial records. At first, she didn't understand what she was seeing. Numbers, transfers, signatures. Then her eyes caught familiar names. Grants. And another, Jody Alden. Her cousin. The pit in her stomach grew heavier with every click. The records showed months of money being moved out of the company account into shell businesses, some even under Jody's name. Tess scrolled further, her heart sinking as she saw documents bearing her father's forged signature. It all came together in one sickening realization. They had used her. The engagement wasn't about love. It was a way to make her look legitimate, to convince investors the Alden family was strong and trustworthy while they drained the company. Her name appeared in promotional material, smiling beside Grant's, stamped across contracts she never signed. They'd made her the face of the lie. She leaned back, staring at the monitor, the hum of the old computer filling the room. Her father's reputation, everything he built from the ground up, was now buried under their... She opened one more file, a ledger listing debts owed to suppliers. The total made her chest tighten. They hadn't just stolen from her, they'd left her father's legacy drowning. Tess grabbed a file folder and flipped through letters addressed to her, unopened, all from lawyers and creditors. She tore one open, her eyes burning as she read words like foreclosure and legal liability. It wasn't just money, they'd made it look like she'd helped them do it. The humiliation hit harder than anger. Everyone she'd invited to that engagement night, every friend who didn't show, they all knew. They must have thought she was part of the fraud, the quiet partner smiling while the company collapsed. The realization made her stomach turn. She could almost hear their whispers. Poor Tess, caught in her own family's scandal. Her fingers clenched around one of the photos she still carried, Grant's grin staring back at her. The love she once felt for him curdled into something sharp. She whispered to the empty office, "You think you took everything from me?" The sound of her voice echoed against the bare walls, and for the first time, she didn't feel broken, just furious. Grant showed up 2 days later, unannounced. Tess was sitting on the steps outside the old company building, her hands still stained with dust from going through files, when his familiar voice broke the silence. "Tess," he said softly, like nothing had happened. He looked tired, but his suit was sharp, his expression carefully built. "I can explain everything." She didn't move. He crouched in front of her, trying to meet her eyes. "You were never supposed to find out this way," he continued, voice low and smooth. "Your father's company was already in trouble. Jody and I only stepped in to keep it alive. The transfers were temporary, just business decisions. I was protecting you." She let out a laugh, bitter and short. "Protecting me? By stealing from me?" Grant flinched, glancing at the passing cars, his mask slipping. "It's complicated, Tess. You wouldn't understand the kind of pressure we were under. You were always so emotional about this stuff. I didn't want you to get hurt." Her jaw tightened. "Then why did everyone disappear from my engagement? Why didn't a single person tell me?" He stood, running a hand through his hair, pacing. "Because I told them to stay away until I could fix it. I was trying to clean things up. You think I wanted this to blow up?" Every word felt like another knife. His tone, his practiced regret, it was all part of the same performance. She'd seen him charm investors with that same voice. It worked on everyone but her now. "Leave Grant," she said finally. "If you say one more word, I'll call the police." He opened his mouth to argue, but the look in her eyes stopped him. After a moment, he turned and walked toward his car without another word. The sound of his tires against gravel was the only sign he'd been there. When the noise faded, Tess stood and drove to her childhood home. The driveway weeds had grown tall, brushing against her car as she pulled in. She felt a hollow ache seeing it again. The front porch where her father taught her to ride a bike, the tree they used to decorate with lights every winter. Her steps slowed when she reached the door. A piece of paper fluttered against the wood, held by a strip of tape. She pulled it free and read the words in disbelief. Notice of eviction. Her breath caught. Her name filled the lines, tenant, Teresa Alden. She didn't even live there anymore, but the property was still under her family's name. Now it was being taken too. She checked her phone, logged into her bank app, and froze. Her accounts were locked. Her name had been blacklisted. Her credit score ruined. Every connection to the Alden name was poisoned. She stood on the porch, staring at the house that once meant safety, and whispered to herself, "You wanted to protect me, Grant? You destroyed me." That night, Tess found the card one of Dalton's men had slipped into the envelope before leaving, the one she hadn't noticed in the chaos. A number, nothing more. She dialed it. A familiar voice answered after one ring. "Miss Alden," he said. "I was expecting your call." It was Mr. Dalton. "I need help," she said quietly. He paused before replying, his tone deliberate. "Your father once helped me. I think it's time I return the favor." The next morning, Tess met Mr. Dalton in person. He chose a quiet diner outside the city, the kind of place where no one paid attention to anyone else. He sat in a booth by the window, gray suit pressed, hands folded neatly around a cup of coffee. His eyes studied her the moment she walked in. "You look like your father," he said calmly as she slid into the seat across from him. Same fire behind the eyes. He didn't quit when people tried to bury him. Tess stared at the steam rising from his cup. "You said you owed him a favor." Dalton nodded once. "I did. He helped me keep this city from eating me alive. Now I'll return the debt, but it won't be easy." "I'm not asking for easy," she said. "I just want back what's mine." He leaned back, watching her carefully. "Then you'll have to play along. No anger, no outbursts. You'll need to make them believe they've won. Grant, your cousin, both of them. You'll smile, forgive, pretend to move on. Meanwhile, you'll be working for me." Tess felt her stomach turn. "You want me to act like nothing happened?" "I want you to be smarter than they are," he replied. "You can't fight them head on. They'll bury you again before you take your first swing. I can give you access resources, but you'll have to wear a mask." She looked out the window at the passing cars, fingers tightening around her napkin. Pretending forgiveness felt impossible, but she also knew it was the only way. Slowly, she nodded. "All right, tell me what to do." Dalton smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. "First, you disappear. New job, new name. No one can trace you to the Aldens. I've arranged something at a design firm downtown, small but connected. You'll start there next week as Tessa Lane. Keep your head down and listen more than you talk. I'll handle the rest." When Tess left the diner, the wind cut through her coat, sharp and cold. Her car felt like a confession booth as she sat inside, whispering the name under her breath, Tessa Lane. It felt strange, detached, like a costume she wasn't sure would fit. A week later, she walked through the glass doors of a bright office filled with sketches and color boards. The receptionist greeted her kindly, unaware that Tessa Lane had once owned a company bigger than the building they stood in. Tess smiled politely, hiding the tension behind her ribs. Dalton's contacts moved quietly behind the scenes, setting her up with secure access to business networks and project databases. She spent late nights after work combing through spreadsheets, tracing hidden transfers and shell accounts. Each discovery pulled another thread of Grant and Jody's scheme. By the time she closed her laptop one night, her reflection stared back at her in the darkened office window. No longer just the woman left alone at her engagement. She whispered to herself, steady and cold, "They'll never see me coming." Months passed before Tess finally stepped back into Grant's world. Under the name Tessa Lane, she wore a different style, clean suits, quiet confidence, and a tone that made people believe she belonged. Through Dalton's network, she secured a temporary position assisting an investor connected to Grant's latest development project. It placed her exactly where she needed to be, close enough to listen, invisible enough not to raise suspicion. The meetings were held in glass offices downtown, the kind of places where money floated through the air like perfume. Tess sat at the edge of the table taking notes, pretending not to notice Grant a few seats away. He laughed with that same practiced charm, gesturing toward plans laid across the table. Jody sat beside him, her hair tied back, her eyes sharp as knives. They looked untouchable, two people who believed they had erased the past. Tess kept her face still, her voice even. She answered questions politely, typed minutes, fetched coffee, all while memorizing every document that crossed her desk. Grant never recognized her under the subtle changes, the shorter hair, the glasses, the new name. When he did glance her way, it was with the detached look he gave any assistant. One afternoon, while collecting files from the printer, she overheard Jody whispering near the window. "Once the merger goes through, we're clear. Dalton's people won't touch us. Alden Construction becomes Horizon Build, and no one will trace the asset." Tessa's fingers tightened around the papers. She turned away before they could see her face. That night, back in her apartment, she replayed the conversation in her head and opened a hidden drive Dalton had set up. Every email she copied, every signature she scanned went there. Slowly, piece by piece, the picture came together. Grant and Jody were preparing to merge with a major developer, using the stolen Alden assets as leverage. If they succeeded, they'd walk away with millions and leave the Alden name buried forever. Tess began recording their meetings, her phone tucked neatly between folders on the conference table. Every fake compliment, every coded sentence, every careless brag, They all became part of the growing collection. She mapped their communication trail late into the night, the glow from her laptop the only light in her apartment. Weeks turned into a quiet rhythm of watching, collecting, and waiting. Her anger no longer burned wildly. It had cooled into precision. She approached her revenge the same way she once designed homes. Measured, balanced, deliberate. Each file she saved felt like laying a brick, each recording another wall rising toward justice. By the time the merger announcement neared, she had enough evidence to crumble everything they had built. She closed her laptop one final time and stared at the screen's reflection, Grant's voice echoing faintly from her last recording. "After this deal," he had said, smug and careless, "no one will remember the Alden name." Tessa's lips curved into a slow, steady smile. "They will," she whispered. "They'll remember exactly who you took it from." The night of their celebration arrived almost exactly a year after Tessa's own engagement had fallen apart. The event was held at a high-end country club on the edge of the city. Grand chandeliers, marble floors, every corner shining with the kind of money stolen from the Alden. Grant and Jody had chosen to celebrate in excess, their invitation boasting a new beginning. Tess read those words once and almost laughed. She walked through the back entrance hours before the guests arrived, wearing the black uniform of the catering staff. Her hair was pinned up, face partly hidden beneath a simple cap. No one paid her any attention as she carried trays and arranged glasses. To them, she was invisible, and that was exactly how she wanted it. From the kitchen doorway, she watched as Grant and Jody made their entrance to applause. Jody wore a glittering silver gown that caught the light with every move. Grant had that same smooth grin he always used when he thought he owned the room. They clinked glasses, posed for photos, thanked their guests for believing in second chances. Tess slipped through the crowd quietly, a tablet tucked beneath her serving tray. Dalton's team had arrived earlier, blending in as staff and security. One of them caught her eye across the room, giving a subtle nod. Everything was ready. When the music softened and Grant raised his glass to make a toast, Tess moved closer to the front. "To redemption," he said proudly. "To love, partnership, and new horizons." Jody smiled beside him, her fingers wrapped possessively around his arm. Laughter rippled through the crowd, champagne flutes lifted high. Tess took a step forward, her voice cut clean through the room. "How about a toast," she said, "to the people you built those horizons on?" The crowd turned toward her. Grant frowned, confused, until recognition flickered across his face. "Tess," he muttered, voice barely audible. She placed the tray down and lifted the tablet. With one tap, the screens around the room flickered, the slideshow of engagement photos vanishing. In their place appeared documents, contracts, transfers, and emails. The next image showed Grant's signature beside hers, Ford. Then a video clip played, Grant and Jody's recorded conversation about the merger. The room fell silent. Gasps followed, whispers rising like a tide. Jody's hand dropped from Grant's arm, her face draining of color. Grant tried to speak, but his voice faltered as the footage rolled on, his own words echoing through the speakers. "No one will remember the Alden name." Tess stepped back, letting the truth speak for itself. Guests shifted uncomfortably, some recording, others staring in disbelief. Then the doors opened and several men in dark suits entered, badges flashing under the bright light. Federal agents. Dalton's contacts led them in. The lead agent walked straight toward Grant, voice firm. "Grant Wallace, Jody Alden, you're under arrest for fraud, embezzlement, and conspiracy." Grant turned to Tess, desperation in his eyes. "You don't understand." "I understand perfectly," she said quietly. As the agents led them out, Tess looked around the room one last time. The applause from her own forgotten engagement echoed faintly in memory, but this time, the silence was hers to command. The days following the arrests passed in a blur. News broke before dawn, flashing across every business feed. Wallace Development merger halted amid federal investigation. By noon, the headlines shifted to names she knew too well: Grant Wallace and Jody Alden, charged with fraud, embezzlement, and obstruction. Their faces filled the screens of the same circles that once praised them. Cameras followed as they were led into custody. No smiles, no speeches this time. Tess watched the coverage from her apartment window, the reflection of the television flickering against the glass. She thought victory would feel cleaner, sharper, maybe even sweet. Instead, it felt heavy. The silence around her carried more weight than the noise of their downfall. Still, there was work to finish. Dalton's team moved quickly, pushing through the legal knots. Within a week, the court froze Grant and Jody's assets, tracing every transaction back to Alden Construction. The forged contracts were invalidated, and with Dalton's help, Tess reclaimed the company's holdings. Property deeds, accounts, equipment, all returned to her name. For the first time in years, the Alden signature was restored with honor. She spent long hours in the office downtown, signing papers that reversed the damage. Each document returned a piece of her father's legacy, yet each signature felt like pressing down on an old bruise. She met with lawyers, accountants, and auditors, all congratulating her on her resilience. She nodded politely but didn't feel proud. The relief didn't come. When the final transfer cleared, Dalton invited her to his office overlooking the river. The city lights shimmered across the water, casting long shadows against the walls. He stood by the window when she entered, his reflection sharp and still. "It's done," she said quietly. He turned, nodding. "The company is clean. Your father's name is clear." Tess sank into a chair, staring at the folder in her lap. "I thought I'd feel something different. Maybe peace." Dalton studied her face for a moment before sitting across from her. "Peace doesn't come from evening the score. It comes from deciding when to stop keeping it." She looked at him, unsure whether to argue or agree. "Then what was all this for?" "For truth," he said simply. "For your father. For yourself. You wanted justice. You have it." Tess leaned back, her gaze drifting to the window. The world outside looked calm, almost indifferent to everything that had just crumbled. "Justice isn't peace," she murmured. Dalton gave a faint smile. "No, but it's a start." They sat in silence after that, the kind of quiet that comes when a storm has passed but the air hasn't cleared. Tess traced the edge of the folder with her fingertips, realizing that revenge hadn't brought her back to who she was. It had only shown her what she could become when everything else was gone. When she finally stood to leave, Dalton didn't stop her. "You've rebuilt the foundation," he said as she reached the door. "Now decide what you want to build on it." She nodded once and stepped out into the cool night, the city lights glinting like ghosts of everything she'd lost, and everything she had taken back. Months slipped quietly into a new rhythm. The noise of the scandal faded, replaced by the hum of rebuilding. Tess reopened the doors of Alden Construction, though the sign above them now carried a different purpose. The company no longer chased profit or prestige. Under her hand, it became a foundation, one meant to help small contractors stay afloat, to keep honest builders from losing everything the way her father once had. The offices that once echoed with deals and deadlines now filled with steady, purposeful work. Tess kept the walls bare, the desk simple. She hired people her father would have respected, craftsmen, designers, builders with worn hands and quiet pride. They didn't ask about her past, and she didn't offer explanations. All that mattered was that the company stood again, its name no longer tied to deceit. Letters began arriving, not from investors or lawyers, but from small firms asking for help, equipment loans, training programs, partnerships. Tess answered each one personally, her signature at the bottom of every approval. She funneled recovered funds into community projects, rebuilding schools, housing, and libraries. The money once stolen in greed now flowed towards something that felt clean. Reporters tried to reach her more than once. They wanted the story, how the betrayed fiancé had turned a broken company into a movement. Each time, Tess declined. She told her assistant to send a polite message. "Alden Construction doesn't give interviews. We build things, not headlines." At night, when the offices emptied and the noise of work faded, she stayed behind. She'd walk the quiet halls, the faint smell of fresh wood in the air, and look out the window toward the river. The city lights reflected on the water, just like they had the night she first met Dalton. Sometimes she thought about calling him, but she never did. His words lingered without needing to be repeated. Justice wasn't peace, but it had given her direction. Still, the past didn't leave her. Every now and then, when the wind rattled the windows or the lights flickered, she'd think of that night, the empty tables, untouched food, the echo of her footsteps on the ballroom. The silence before the black cars appeared never stopped replaying. It had carved itself into her, reminder of what betrayal sounded like when it filled a room. She never tried to erase it. Instead, she let it stay, like a scar that kept her grounded. It reminded her that even beauty could start in ruin. As the year came to a close, Tess stood outside the newly restored headquarters, watching workers hang a simple plaque on the front wall. The engraved letters caught the sunlight. Alden Foundation, building with integrity. She smiled faintly, not with pride, but with calm acceptance. The company was no longer a weight on her shoulder. It was a promise kept, to her father, to herself, and to the silence that had started it all. The afternoon sun stretched long shadows across the front of the Foundation's new headquarters when the sound of engines broke the quiet. Tess looked up from her desk as the low hum grew louder, steady and familiar. Through the tall glass windows, she saw them, sleek black cars gliding to a stop along the curb. Her heart gave a strange, slow thud. For a moment, it felt like time folded in on itself, carrying her back to that first night when everything had fallen apart. But this time, the air felt different. No tension, no fear, only stillness. She rose from her chair and walked to the entrance. The front doors opened, and 3 men stepped inside, dressed in dark suits. The eldest, silver-haired and composed, removed his hat as he approached. "Ms. Alden," he said with quiet respect. We represent Mr. Dalton's estate. Tess's chest tightened. She didn't need to ask. The look in the man's eyes said enough. Dalton was gone. The man held out a sealed envelope, the kind of heavy stationery Dalton always used. His tone softened. He asked that this be delivered to you personally. Tess accepted it with both hands. Thank you, she said, her voice low. The men bowed their heads slightly before turning back toward the cars. The engine started again, one by one, pulling away in smooth formation. She stood in the doorway until they disappeared down the street, leaving behind only the fading echo of tires on asphalt. Back inside her office, sunlight cut through the blinds, striping the floor in gold. Tess sat at her desk, broke the seal, and unfolded the papers within. On top lay a short letter written in Dalton's steady hand. You learned to build from ruin, Tess. Keep building. Below it, a legal deed transferred his remaining shares of the foundation to her name. Dalton had left her everything he still controlled, the last piece of his world, placed quietly in her care. She read the words twice, fingers tracing the ink as if it carried his voice. The man who had first appeared out of the dark, the one who guided her through every storm, had left her his final trust. No debts, no conditions, just a message, simple and complete. Tess set the papers down and rose to her feet. She walked to the window overlooking the street, the city stretching wide and bright beyond. The glass reflected her face faintly, older now, steadier, softened by years that had shaped rather than broken her. Outside, the traffic moved on, ordinary and unaware. The spot where the cars had been was already empty, like they'd never existed at all. For a long moment, Tess stood there, letting the quiet settle around her. It wasn't victory or pride that filled her chest, it was release. The kind that came not from winning, but from finally being done with the fight. She whispered to the empty office, I'll keep building. And for the first time in years, she smiled without pain. Hey besties. Thanks for sticking with me till the end of this wild story. Imagine planning your dream engagement, being left alone, and then turning that heartbreak into power. Tess lost everything, love, family, trust, but rebuilt her life piece by piece until justice was hers. Sometimes revenge isn't about rage, it's about rising. If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to like, share, comment, and subscribe for more. See you next time.